Hey, what's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you all of the basics that I can teach you in Roblox Studio for particle effects. Now, particles can be stretched out to be as realistic as you could possibly make it. It just depends on what is in your arsenal of images. Now, typically most people will just go to Toolbox and then they're just going to go into models and look up particle packs and stuff. This is something you do not want to do. The particle packs that are within the toolbox are almost useless to the general VFX population. Now, do they help as a starting? They do, but I'm going to give you some more options. So, the three plugins that I'm going to be recommending is VFX Suite. Now, VFX Suite is one of the top VFX I don't know why it's not exactly working right now, but VFX Suite is one of the best plugins that you can use, and it is also free. You also have VFX Editor, which is pretty nice to have on the side, but overall, it is just simply for editing particles. You can create a new instance, yada yada yada, and it's basically a special properties tab just for particles. Um, but in the general basis, this particular plugin is just another properties tab. It doesn't necessarily do anything else. Now, it does have a general limit, but overall, it does the same thing that the properties table does. But if you want to have it, it does work just as good, if not better. Now, the next one I'm going to recommend is called Six Library. Now, Six Library is something I use on the side just because it's a very big particle pack and it has around 600 different images that you can use and also flip books as well. Now, this is just to reach into the dabbles that I don't have. But it is also a very helpful plugin to have if you want to get into VFX. The next one is Zido Visual. This is the best. This is the best plugin for any VFX artist. It recently got a very big update, and it is probably one of the best plugins that I've ever used as far as using it in VFX. So I highly, highly, highly recommend getting this one as well. Now that we've gone through all the plugins and some recommendations, we're going to go ahead and get into the general basics. I don't know what just happened there. So, I think I hit a wrong key. In this part, we have an attachment and a particle emitter. So, just to show you the differences, we're going to go ahead and make this part nice and big. And then, just so you guys can see the part, we're going to have that. So, now, right beside it, we're going to make an example of all the different things that we can do. So this right here is just a part with a basic particle emitter in it. No edits, no nothing. These two are exactly identical. Now, one thing that you can do is if you don't want your particles to spread out and you don't want to make your part super, super small, you can add an attachment to the part, and then you could put your particle emitter inside of it. And there you have it. Now the particles are in a single file line. So, how particle emitters work is, depending on what you put the particle in, it will emit out of the surface area of whatever part you put it in. So let's say we switch it here to this side. If you scroll all the way down, we're going to make the properties nice and big so you guys can see. So if we go to the particle emitter, you can see in the emission section of the properties that it has a directional output. Now, I'm sure I don't have to explain what all of these mean, so we're going to emit it from the right side. You can see the difference that they're all clustered up, and that they don't really spread out from how big the surface area is, other than the fact that these PNG images are a little bit bigger than the block is. Now, if we did it from the top again, you can see that they spread out a lot more just because the surface area of this part is bigger. So, if you wanted to control that center point and you didn't want to have all this surface area here, you would put an attachment just like this. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do with attachments, and attachments, if you decide to use them, require a lot more editing than you would probably anticipate. Now, using a part versus an attachment comes with its pros and cons. So let's say if you just wanted to have a small single point that you could focus on, the attachment makes it easier to display that, and you don't have to worry about all the nifty spreading. Now, a part, let's say if you want to go with something a little more randomized and something that can cover a large area, per se, let's say we would make this our hitbox. So, what can we, let's see, let's use our scaling. So, in a general basis, we would put our transparency at 0.5, just so we can see everything that's going on. So, you can see that it's not directly emitting from the top anymore, and it actually starts way down here. Now, the amount of particles that come out does not generally base off of how big something is. It doesn't matter how big you make a part or a piece, it's always going to be at the same rate, which will lead us down to the emissions bar again. So your rate is how many you want to come out. So if we change it to 100, you can see that a lot more are coming out of the part versus there being less. Lifetime is the duration of how long these particles last. So right now we have it randomized between a 5 to 10 range. That means some of these particles are going to last 5 seconds, and you can see the other ones way up here are lasting around 10. Now, a range runs a little bit differently in a particle. So let's say if we just change the lifetime to 1 second. That's the number intervals that these would be focused on. You can see that all of them are going to last 1 second, although their spawn points within the block or their generation points are a bit different because it's such a wide area block and it's not just going to be super small. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit smaller so you guys can see it. So you can see that they're generally generating in just about the same spot, and they don't have a super long lifespan. So after 1 second, the PNG deletes. Now, per se, if we change this to 10 seconds, you can see that they're going to keep floating up and up and up for 10 seconds until they eventually delete. Now, the difference between having a range and a regular number, let's say if we do a 1, 10. That means that some of these are going to generate at 1 second, and any number between 1 and 10, they can randomly delete in. So you can see, if we back up here a little bit, you can see that they're randomly getting deleted. So in a 1 to 10 second time range, any of these can be deleted. So that pretty much sums up our lifetime. And you guys are already familiar with the rate. It just produces more. Now, rotation. Rotation is just the rotation of the image. So let's say if we rotate it by 50, you can see that all of the stars are going to rotate just a little bit. Although this is probably a terrible image to use. So let's just use a rate of 1 just so we can focus on the particles on the rotation. So let's say we do a 90 degree. The star would rotate completely sideways. So we're just going to put on 100 just so you can see the minor difference of which way they're facing. Now, rotation can be set in a range, and it could also be set in a in a massive number. So the max number of rotation is 360 degrees. Now, you can also set it to negative 360. So let's set it to 360, negative 360. And you can see that anything within a 360 to negative 360 range, the PNGs will randomly come out, or the particles will randomly come out, and they will be in a range between those two. So let's say we go down to rotation speed. Rotation speed can also be this way. Just so you can actually see it take an effect, we'll set it to a 100, comma, minus 100. So some of these will spin in one direction. Some of them will hardly spin at all. And the rotation speed is randomized between a negative 100 and a 100 speed. So you can see that some of them are moving quite quickly, some of them are moving very slow. So that should give you a general basis of how to range numbers versus setting a solid number. And in some instances, one is better than the other. Now, speed, I think that's kind of a given. It's just how fast these particles actually move. And they are just going to fly up straight and nice and neatly. Now, the spread angle is one of the tricky ones. So, a spread angle basically means that you can change the degree of which they come out of their center point. Now, we're going to come back over here to our attachment because it's a lot easier to see. So let's say we do a 15 spread angle. That means that the direction that they come out will be a consistent 15 degrees. Now, we can also make this a range. We can make it 15 to negative 15, and it'll increase that range a lot more, which means anything that fly through this specific range from 15 degrees to negative 15 degrees. So that means that it can randomly come out at any certain point, or you can even check it. And this is going to give you your X and Y. So your X being side to side, front, back, whichever way you're looking at this. So let's say we do a 50, negative 50. So that almost gives us a full wide range of view. Spread angle is kind of something you have to play around with. It's not something that you can just do it once and it's nice and simple. It's something that you really have to play around with. Now, down here, we're into the emitter shape. A lot of this stuff under here isn't really needed for the most part. A lot of this can be ignored from emitter shape, motion, particles. Those particular three are something that you need for only certain situations. But if you really need to know, I can always make another video on how those operate as well. Now, the flipbook is something we will get into another video as well. We won't directly talk about that in this video because they can be quite confusing. So, appearance. It's something that everything has in the game. You can change it to different colors. You have a full rainbow wheel. Any color that's ever existed, you can change any particle to. Now, light emission is how bright something is. So you can see if we change it to a 0.5, the particle gets a little bit brighter. And if we change it to a 1, which is the highest value the light emission can be, it will turn into a nice little beaming light. So light emission does not mean that the particle will light up the area. So if we drag it down, you can see that the light emission from particle does not actually affect any surroundings. It's just the particle. Now, light influence is generally what your game is. So if you have anything in lighting that can affect the particle, it will. That's what light influence means. Light influence is basically your surrounding lighting and how it affects the particle. 1 being 100% and 0 being 0%. So if we just drag this down, it's a lot easier to see if the light emission is off. So you can see that it slightly shifts colors based on the light influence that the surrounding area has. Now, light influence, if you set it to 0, you have a new pop-up called brightness. Now, brightness can be used in many different ways. It can be used in your light emission, and the brightness of this is pretty much infinite. I think the max is 10K because that's just how much, that's just as bad as how much the system can hold. But we can sit here and hold 0 forever. And all it's going to do is keep getting brighter. And if we set brightness at 0, your image will be black. Now, in order for brightness to work properly, you cannot do anything to your colors or anything like that if your brightness is set to 0. So I suggest keeping it on 1. And even if you had this on 1, you can still have a solid black color. Now, you can still change the brightness of a black object. It will slightly affect the images, mostly the edges of an image, depending on what kind it is. But it is pretty helpful sometimes, especially with certain particles and flipbooks. Now, your general light emission is what prevents your image from appearing if it is the color black. Now, your light emission almost becomes like a transparency bar just because the color black doesn't have any color to it. Now, you can also make your light emission in the negatives. So let's say if we set it to -5, then center point of the image will become whatever color you have selected. And you can also adjust that from that size. So we obviously have size, which basically just makes it bigger or smaller. It can get into more depth, but we can get that into a later video. We also have squash. We'll actually come back to that one here in a minute. Orientation. So facing camera world up. That means that this image is going to be pointing straight up while also facing the camera. Now, if we have regular face camera, if we look down on this image, you can see that its orientation changes. But if we put it as facing camera world up, it'll always face up, but still be facing the camera. Nice and neatly. Now we have velocity parallel. Velocity parallel is very similar to camera facing world up. It is essentially the same thing. It just rotates on a singular axis, does not change, just faces straight up. Now, velocity parallel is a little bit different than camera facing camera world up, but in the general regard, you probably won't use facing camera world up very often, but you will be using velocity parallel. Now, velocity perpendicular is a complete opposite. It means that it faces up at all times. It does not rotate and does not move. All it does is face up. You can see that if we move our camera around, you can see that it doesn't follow us. It just stays in that straight line no matter where we go in the studio or in the game. This one is particularly very good for stuff like shockwaves, which I'll be teaching you guys in a later video as well. Transparency, just how visible the image is. It goes from a 0 to 1 range. So 1 being fully transparent and 0 being fully visible. And you can also do half and half. Now the offset is a tricky one. So the offset is basically how far you want to move it away from that piece. So let's say if we do 10 studs. There we go. I'll put it down more. So there you have it. You can see that there's a very visible gap. between, even though it still generates. But down here, it's very hard to see. Here, let's do a facing camera. The player's appearance from that image is going to be generally off the part. So if we have it at 0, it's going to be on the center. And let's say we can do a normal 10, which will bring it forward. Positive numbers will bring it closer to the player's camera, and negative numbers will push it back. This can be pretty helpful when you're trying to get specific things to look proper. But overall, it is very, very helpful and can be used whenever you're trying to lay your particles together. But we'll also talk about layering in a different video. But overall, this is what I had to say in the video. I don't want to make this video super long. Now, I hope this covers most of everything of what you guys needed. And please leave a like, leave a comment too if you have any questions. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.